La Magdalena qui est avec nous aujourd'hui. On est chanceux de l'avoir pour une conférence qui va porter donc sur le Insurgent Heritage, Grassroots Movements and Citizenship in Chile. Ok, merci. Donc c'est ça, Magdalena, elle est doctorante en architecture à l'Université d'Austin, donc c'est ça, à l'école d'architecture. Elle travaille en tant que sur le patrimoine, mais en tant que processus socio-culturel et sur les communautés patrimoniales, donc les politiques de la mémoire au Chili, en Amérique latine plus largement. Et elle a travaillé au sein d'institutions publiques et d'associations dédiées à des initiatives d'éducation et à la recherche et au développement de la participation publique dans les sites du patrimoine mondial et des sites de patrimoine national au Chili et aussi au Royaume-Uni. Et son doctorat propose une analyse critique de 3 associations patrimoniales au Chili, en s'attardant sur la manière dont les relations de pouvoir, l'action sociale et des alternatives au discours institutionnel sur le passé influencent la production et la définition du patrimoine. Elle s'intéresse particulièrement au discours et aux stratégies des communautés locales et met en œuvre, que les communautés locales mettent en œuvre pour participer aux décisions institutionnelles sur le patrimoine en redéfinissant les frontières politiques, conceptuelles, professionnelles du patrimoine. Et elle est aussi engagée dans plusieurs autres initiatives activistes au Chili, particulièrement dans le réseau engagé dans le patrimoine, la justice sociale et les droits humains, et a contribué à la fondation d'ALDEA, une organisation sans but lucratif qui réunit l'architecture, l'éducation et la participation sociale au Chili et au Royaume-Uni. Merci Lucie pour cette information. Donc, Magdalena est l'invitée de Lucie et de la chaire en patrimoine urbain, évidemment, et on profiter de sa présence au CELAT pour la recevoir. Thank you for being here, Magdalena.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here today and for bearing with us with the projector problem that I think I provoked, or I brought about that. And thank you, Lucy, for inviting me to present here today, and Estelle for organizing. So, let's begin. I will start with a brief introduction to give you a little bit of context of what has inspired my current research. Then I will present my research based mainly in one of the cases that I'm doing, but I also gonna touch upon the other 2 cases that complement my main case. I will conclude by linking my research with the undergoing political and social events in Chile, because I think that can shed light on the broader implications of this work and generally of critical heritage studies. So this is the context. So 2019 was a special year marking a global insurgency against inequality in many different parts of the world. So we saw how hundreds of thousands marched in the streets of Hong Kong, my country Chile, Ecuador and India, to name just a few places, becoming a global explosion of people demanding radical changes to a system of power that had failed them and that has also deepened inequalities in an increasingly urbanized world. The demands and forms of mobilizations of the different social movements are different and context-specific, obviously, but they also share similarities and they have learned from one another to advance their goals. So one interesting aspect that they have in common, but that they also show like in other previous social movements, smaller scale, is the claim is how that from traditional demands related to labor, housing, health and education, the claims today have expanded into broader questions regarding the cultural dimensions of citizenship. So, for example, demands regarding environmental demands, gender equality, identity issues, migration, indigenous rights, among others. So in Chile, an important claim that has become visible in the current mobilizations, but that has also its presence from at least 10 years ago, as I will show later, are demands regarding the democratization of how memory and cultural heritage is produced, defined, and preserved in our territories. Heritage grassroots organizations are using heritage as a tool to legitimize their own narratives about the past and the places they care about, but at the same time they are using it as a political instrument to extend their citizenship rights and influence decision-making in the production of the built environment. So in my time working in the National Monuments Council, before I started my PhD, I was lucky to work with many of these grassroots organizations as well as urban and human rights activists. That they showed me the paradox of a system of governance that seemed very inclusionary, but that in reality had very limited spaces for people to participate in the public life and in decision making. So these experiences motivate me to grasp with what is obscured in the official narratives of heritage and seek to understand the broader relationships and counteractions that shape historic places. It particularly inspired me to seek to understand how memory and cultural heritage becomes a tool for communities to create new spaces of citizenship and participations in contexts where such rights are limited. So in this context, the questions that drive my research are the following. First, I'm interested to analyze how the state has constructed the heritage discourse throughout history in Chile. I'm also interested to analyze what is the structure of dominant state-led heritage governance in Chile and what are its fractures and limitations. And I'm also obviously interested in investigating how are heritage grassroots movements challenging and appropriating dominant understandings of heritage in Chile, and in the process reproducing new spaces of citizenship and rights. So I will begin by briefly touching upon the first two questions, but I will devote the majority of the presentation to the third question. So my research suggests that just in many other parts in the world, official urban heritage in Chile is exclusionary. The spaces and places that are preserved and the histories that are validated through heritage designation and planning and preservation planning and architectural conservation are largely decided and defined by governmental institutions, policymakers, and heritage experts. These institutions and agents promote the assumption that heritage is a positive and consensual thing related with old, monumental, aesthetically pleasant buildings, often ignoring the social processes and people related to historic sites if they represent dissonant or contested cultural relations, or if they are not associated with a positive version of colonial history, nationalism, or the capital. This authorized heritage discourse, as conceptualized by Laura Jane Smith, tends to privilege certain narratives about the past while obscuring the experiences of underrepresented communities. So in Chile, in the last decade, this authorized heritage discourse that can be traced back to the 19th century oligarchy and the creation of the nation-state has been complicated by neoliberal policies that were implemented in the country during Augusto Pinochet's dictatorships in the 70s and 80s, and that governments during democracy had deepened, creating fragmentation in power structures, and especially in planning and preservation frameworks. This process has resulted in what I call, drawing from the concept of geographer Karen Thiel wanted cities, in wanted heritage landscapes. That is, historic landscapes that reflect individual and social trauma produced by different forms of state violence and planning modes that continue to harm inhabitants and their environments. So based on my PhD work, that is also informed, as I said, by my previous professional practice, I want to offer in this presentation a different understanding of historic preservation or cultural heritage that challenges the model promoted by Western dominant frames. So by considering the dark side of preservation and planning and historic landscapes as wounded, heritage cannot be understood as an intrinsic, consensual, and positive, tangible thing. It is rather understood as a cultural and social process that can constitute either a tool for perpetuating historic inequalities or an instrument of social and cultural control. The stories and creative practices of Chilean heritage activists who live with histories of disempowerment, displacement, state repression, and marginalization show how, through memory work and what I call insurgent heritage, that are a notion that I will explain later, people are active agents that surpasses dominant ways of understanding and shaping heritage. They propose multiple and more inclusive perspectives that are fundamental to imagine more just possible futures and for the formation of political and critical communities. I will illustrate my argument based on the preservation work led mainly by LOTAAS residents. As I said, I will touch later on 2 other cases. So to provide some context, I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat for some of you this context. LOTA is an ex-coal mining town in southern Chile that has suffered the consequences of the industrialization after the closure of the mine in 1997. So today is one of the poorest areas in the country and one with the highest unemployment rates. So for example, from a population of 50,000 people, nearly 6,000 still relies on emergency jobs that were created by the state with the closure of the mine and that provides a minimum wage salary, and that today are managed by private NGOs. But paradoxically, LOTA is also one of the municipalities with more neighborhoods and buildings in the country designated as historic sites. This is because since 2007, residents, ex-miners, women and young people have mobilized to protect through the available official regulations places that matter to them. They have seen in heritage and tourism a possibility for economic and social improvement and an alternative development to the state fair rehabilitation plans. But unfortunately, as I explained earlier, Chilean official heritage framework is contradictory and exclusionary. Whereas official narratives and representations are authoritative and homogeneous, often promoting an image of the past that privileged racialized, gendered, and high culture narratives, its practice within a neoliberal structure of governance is diffused and fragmented in various cultural and planning agencies that are not coordinated with each other. Furthermore, these practices are increasingly marked by a discourse of inclusion that does not translate into real spaces of participation, thus blocking lay people access to decision-making and creating gaps and inconsistencies in how places, especially those of underrepresented communities, are preserved and developed. These contradictions and lacks of spaces to participate has resulted in what I consider a wounded heritage landscape, reflected in 2 main consequences. That despite people has been able to protect their places through the official regulation, these official accounts of heritage are constructed by experts or authorities that normally celebrate narratives of capitalist development and the company founder's legacy, ignoring the experiences and memories of the working class residents. It has also resulted in unequal planning and preservation models that result in heritage landscapes marked by decay, ruination, and oblivion, that makes visible how places and its inhabitants continue to be harmed by dominant social, cultural, economic, and political practices embedded in weak and fragmented planning frameworks. In this context, the state has granted the management of 2 important heritage sites to a private NGO, the Cauciño Park, which was the home of the mining company founders and that was later transformed into a park in the 50s for the workers and their families, and the Chiflón del Diablo, that was one of the first coal pits that functioned in LOTA with the founding of the mining industry. So this private NGO that is not even from LOTA, is from Santiago, charges entrance to local people to access these places that were traditionally part of the everyday life of Latinos and Latinas. As we see, the heritage route that they promote only includes 4 heritage sites, that is far less from what is acknowledged by the community and even by official heritage designations. So for example, they promote the Chiflón del Diablo and the Cauciño Park that I already explained, but they also promote the Catholic Church that was built by the company founder Matías Cauciño and the theater of the company town, all forms of authorized heritage that celebrate basically colonial or capitalist relations. In this context, residents feel excluded from how heritage is narrated and managed by that official agency, and they also feel frustrated with bureaucratic processes and coordinated state practices and by the lack of spaces to influence decision-making. So as a response to these exclusions, LOTA's residents have organized in the Heritage Grassroots organization, MESA Ciudadana de Patrimonio, Cultura y Turismo de LOTA, or Citizens Heritage Roundtable in English, as an abbreviation, to challenge exclusionary notions and practices in heritage and planning and envision an alternative future for their city. The MESA gathers social leaders, discontent residents, former miners, emergency job workers, women, neighborhood associations, and many types of social and cultural organizations. The main goal of the MESA is to foster an alternative development plan for LOTA based on their cultural heritage and their community-led tourism. Since 2007, the MESA have been working to achieve this goal through what Faranak Miraftas defines as a combination of invited and invented spaces of participation. So invited spaces are those sanctioned by the government and NGOs, and invented spaces are those innovative actions created by people themselves to confront the authorities. While some of their innovative actions, such as street protests, sit-ins, and popular education initiatives, are inspired by their memories of social struggle, like the labor movements or the dictatorship resistance, other actions are new and have emerged from the deindustrialization and post-dictatorial contexts. For example, the alternative tourism and heritage walking trails that they have started to develop for tourists and schools. And I will exemplify the latter through the story of two women and their initiative DESCUBRE LOTA CAMINANDO that is part of the MESA. So I will present like an extended version of one of the stories that I presented on Friday for the ones that were on the symposium on Friday. DESCUBRE LOTA CAMINANDO is a collaborative heritage project led by two women, Rosa and Nelly, born and raised in LOTA. They introduce themselves as daughters and granddaughters of miners, and they are single mothers with no formal jobs, and they have created this initiative as an opportunity to work, self-develop, and generate an income. They offer three different historic routes that they offer to tourists and to schools from LOTA and nearby cities. And in addition to the heritage sites promoted by official agency and the official designations, as we see in this map, the places that they cover in their routes are very different and are many, many more. These routes highlight the urban history and the industrial ruins, the coast border, the geological formations of LOTA, as well as the cultural traditions and social relations of Latinas and Latinos. The stories that they tell in the walks through the city varies according to the different memories that they recall in the different places, as well as the different people they encounter in the way who share with visitors their own memories, stories, and visions about LOTA. The heritage hiking, as they like to call it, differs from a guided tour because they consider that the latter commodifies their experience as working class people. They start by locating the origins of LOTA in the indigenous Mapuche inhabitants that occupy the land before the Spanish colonizers, and by explaining the original name of the city Mapudungun, which is LOTA, or small village. Then they follow with a brief performative ritual to expel any bad energies and at the same time receive the good energies from the universe and the earth. They end this ritual by asking participants to repeat with them 3 times, "I love LOTA." While walking through the city, Rosa narrates her life as a child, sharing communal bathrooms, ovens, and lavanderias that were part of the collective housing of the company town. Instead of telling a romanticized version about these shared spaces, as most official accounts do, Rosa focuses on women's everyday life struggles to get a space to bake the bread or wash their clothes. When we stop at the vestige of the lavanderia that we see here, now sitting in the public space without a function, she explains how she hated to go to do the laundry with her mother because women would get aggressive to get a spot to do the laundry down on time. Passing by the Casa de la Cultura, these buildings here, that is a deteriorated building that used to be the miners' dining hall, she tells me about the drinking habits of miners and stories about gender violence triggered both by the precarious lives of the working people and also by the strong culture of machismo that still exists in LOTA. The walking trail is also filled with stories and urban legends that have been transferred through generations and that are part of their social imaginaries. These are stories of collective struggles for better labor and living conditions and many memories of support and care in the neighborhood and in the places of work. In some of the stops, residents get involved by telling their own histories about LOTA's past and present. So here is Don Luis, that was a former miner, and that he is explaining how the industry worked. And here is two women that still bake the bread in the traditional ovens. The 2-hour-long walk ends with a Latino food tasting in the headquarters of the school LOTA Caminando, which is a municipality derelict building that they managed to get transferred temporarily to them, and that they have slowly restored and rehabilitated to house their activities. The school LOTA Caminando enables visitors, children, and young people to listen to the nuances and depth of the living experiences of the working class of LOTA from a perspective that is far from being idealized as opposed to official accounts. Both Rosa and Nelly use their hair red as a political statement and as a way of consciously carrying and embodying their collective memory in their own selves while they do their heritage work. They say that the red is a provocation because it represents the union forces that mark LOTA's history of social empowerment. According to Rosa, heritage has enabled her to have a role in decision-making in the planning of LOTA and in the preservation of the places that matter to them, and fundamentally, it has empowered her to occupy a public role in the public life, a position in the public life that didn't previously exist for her as a female. Yet, Descubre LOTA Caminando offers much more than heritage walking trails and alternative narratives about LOTA's past. Both Nelly and Rosa, as active members of the MESA, the organization I introduced you earlier, have become an important voice in the local level, promoting the care for their environment, the neighborhood, and its inhabitants. For example, together with the MESA, they have organized protests and sit-ins, like the protests we see here, in the municipality office to demand adequate trash collection in the city. They often conduct informal negotiations with local authorities to push the implementation of projects and reconstruction of deteriorated homes. They have been invited by the municipality to be part of the local Council of Cultural Development. They have managed to get certified by the National Tourism Agency, and they organize heritage educational workshops for neighborhood leaders and young people to integrate them in the project they envision for LOTA. They also partner with scholars like me to advance their goals and continue to break from hegemonic representations and practices in heritage. So, for example, last month I finished a community art project organized together with the MESA, and the workshop resulted from the findings of my research and was inspired by the work of the women in LOTA, like the ones of Rosa and Nelly. The objective of the workshop was to re-signify how the history of the city of LOTA is told from a female's point of view. So if the histories of the workers tend to be concealed by the celebratory history of the coal industry, the histories of LOTA's women remain mostly invisible from the heritage narratives. So drawing from traditional forms of creations of Latinas like sewing, knitting, and embroidery, I facilitated a 2-week-long project to collectively create this textile that maps the history of LOTA through their personal and familial stories of Latinas. The workshop created a space for women to connect, reflect collectively upon historical gender oppression that has marked LOTA, validate their life stories, and negotiate the narratives of place and historic preservation. They will use the textile to inform the script of a performance plays they are currently developing about the history of the women of LOTA, and that they will tour through the country during the year. But the project also resulted in a useful and rich tool that will inform the long-term preservation plan that the government is developing to inscribe part of the city of LOTA in the World Heritage List. The MESA will present this textile in the regional working group that the MESA is part of to inform preservation strategies and narratives of the nomination to the World Heritage List. So as we see, the heritage work that Latinas and Latinas do through invited and invented spaces of participation reveals that heritage seems to be taking several roles within the community and the wider political and cultural arena than those framed by the dominant voices of the states, the experts, and the private NGOs. So we see how LOTAAS residents use heritage to negotiate a new identity as an ex-coal mining community, emphasizing on their working class and gender memories. They also use it as a political tool to create new spaces of inclusion in decision-making that do not formally exist in the current system of governance in planning and preservation. For example, by utilizing heritage discourses for organizing, they have created new spaces of citizenship for those historically excluded from the spheres of power and public participation, such as women. They have also articulated in this context a new type of right, the right to heritage. Heritage is also a tool to improve their material living conditions in their neighborhoods and for building social capacity, decentering the field from the expert and technical knowledge. And finally, the knowledge and actions of Latinas and Latinos extend the meaning of heritage and planning, especially because the relation constructed through memory work and what I call insurgent heritage provides what Karen Till defines as place-based ethics of care. That is, material and intangible resources to care for places, for people, and for the self. So my concept of insurgent heritage draws from insurgent planning and explains the preservation knowledges and actions that emerge from the social life of people to address inequalities, exclusions, and oblivions in the production of the built environment. Through these insurgent narratives and practices, marginalized groups surpasses the authorized heritage and alternative binary and blur the boundaries between the official and unofficial, proposing multiple perspectives to envision alternative futures. Memory work as an effective process acts as a driver to these insurgent practices that enables people to fight forgetfulness and mitigate the economic precariousness and isolation imposed by the forces of presentism, individualism, and neoliberal bureaucracy. Memory work as an effective process of using the past as a resource of the present acts as a driver to these insurgent heritage practices that enables people, as I said, to fight forgetfulness and mitigate the economic precariousness. Latinos and Latinas work, however, is not the only insurgent heritage examples in Chile. I want to very briefly, not that very, but briefly, explain other two grassroots organizations that are part of my research and that complement the case of LOTA, especially because they are different in terms of heritage size, the contestations, the types of grassroots organizations that they have formed, and especially because they shed light in different forms of citizenship and rights that arise from their struggles. So the first one is Valparaíso and the organization, the grassroots organization, Pacto Urbano La Matriz. Valparaíso is well known for its steep hills covered of brightly colored houses that we see here in this picture that rise above the Pacific Ocean. It's also very well known for being one of the most important ports at the beginning of the 20th century in the Americas, and that was very important for the globalization process. In Chile, it's very known for being a traditional cradle of social movements. The state registered the city's historic center on the World Heritage List in 2003 as a strategy to revitalize the economy of the city and improve the image of the country internationally in the post-dictatorial context. But since the inscription, Valparaíso has served as a paradox to the great abandonment and the deterioration of its environment and its population. Furthermore, the status of the city as a World Heritage Site has meant an exponential increment of investors of the areas of tourism, real estate development, and commercial development at the expense of local entrepreneurs and citizens' more informal initiatives. These interventions modify the urban landscape in strong contrast with the original vision formulated when Valparaíso was envisioned as a World Heritage Site. This evidenced the fragility of the Chilean state, legal procedures for interventions and urban planning, as well as the lack of capability of the local government to achieve such a challenge. The World Heritage status, as one heritage activist puts it, open quote, has only benefited some external company owners that have seen in Valparaiso an opportunity for business and tourism and the preservation of the physical appearance of only two hills. But the cultural traditions, the social interactions that were so important for the heritage of those areas is gone because of gentrification. Porteños were never involved in the UNESCO nomination, and there has been no master plan or policy to encourage Valparaiso citizens to make a future out of its cultural heritage. All these issues led to one of the country's most contentious events related to heritage in the last decade. In 2012, Valparaiso became focus of controversy due to the proposed plans to expand the port along the coast border of the city, and this would mean permanently blocking the access to the sea for citizens and tourists, and as well as blocking the view of the sea from the city center. It would also mean the privatization of the coast border because of a construction of a shopping center in the part of the coast border that wouldn't be used for the development of the port. So the conflicts that emerged from these new developments, which were realized without citizens' engagement, revealed two important considerations. First, the conflicts have evidenced the lack of urban planning for the city of Valparaiso and the difficulties in articulating protective regulations and an integrated management plan that can provide the World Heritage Site with the proper instruments to manage the preservation of the city and its port as a whole, so not as two separate territories. Second, at a local level, it has raised questions as to whether including Valparaiso in the UNESCO World Heritage List may have itself caused damage to its cultural heritage, because since at the time of the inscription in 2003, no comprehensive conservation management plan was submitted, and the nomination itself was done without any type of community involvement. And until today, there has been no agreement regarding this supposed conservation management plan that is a requirement of UNESCO when you nominate sites. Indeed, Valparaiso World Heritage designation poses a contradiction. On the one hand, the official discourse emphasizes the seaport glories past and the key role that it played in the globalization process during the 19th century. But on the other hand, the designation is tied to deep and democratic forms of development and the description of a narrative that is not reflected in the reality of people's everyday life. So as a result, there were no opportunities to think about a development model that would enable the city to grow while engaging with the needs and ideas of the social actors interested in the planning and preservation of their city. As a response, a citizens organization was developed across Valparaiso that is called Pacto Urbano La Matriz of Valparaiso. So the claims of this movement were directed both to the national level and the international level, so to the state and local government, but also to the UNESCO. They demanded direct participation in the decisions of the planning and preservation of their city, and reclaimed the cultural heritage and port activity to the local benefit of porteños, as Valparaiso people are called. They used various invited and invented spaces of participation to stop the development in the port, the coast border, such as bringing UNESCO representatives to evaluate the site, also multiple protests in the streets, press denunciations, as well as creative and artistic demonstrations in the public space. As we see here, that's a street artist called Mimo Tuga, who got involved in the movement and called the attention of the wider society. In 2015, they organized a citizens' mayoral campaign to challenge the political duopoly that had administered the city since the return to the democracy through a very corrupted system of administration of the city. So through a participatory program, they selected a citizens candidate who ran for mayor together with two citizens councillors, and they all won the elections in 2016 and formed the citizens municipality. From having a development plan for the coast border with no citizens involvement at all, today those plans have been halted, both the port development and the shopping center, And now national and local authorities are working together with Pacto Urbano and other citizens to envision new plans for that area. It's yet to be seen what is going to happen there. The third case is Colonia Dignidad, which was a settlement founded in 1961 in the south of Chile by German immigrants. Gradually, the settlement was turned into a closed cult by the pedophile and ex-Nazi leader, Paul Schaeffer. He kept the residents of Colonia under a repressive system of control under over 45 years. He also collaborated with the military dictatorship in the 70s and 80s, whose secret police used the colony as a place of torture, execution, and disappearance of political opponents. So it is estimated that Colonia Dignidad was the last destiny of at least 300 of the 1,000 people that remained disappeared in Chile. In 2005, Paul Schaeffer was captured and later died in prison. However, different groups of victims have emerged reclaiming the place and the memory of Colonia Dignidad. So on the one hand are the residents of the settlement, many who remain in a very complex situation between being victims and victimizers. And they have transformed the space into a touristic retreat called Villa Baviera, or Bavaria Villa in English, in an attempt to erase the dark history that has marked the place and distance themselves from that dark history, and also to be able to profit from their property through tourism. On the other hand, on my left, is the human rights activists that demand that the state expropriates the land and transform it into a human rights museum and memory site. A group of survivors of Colonia Dignidad and relatives of the disappeared and human rights activists formed in 2014 the Association of Memory and Human Rights of Colonia Dignidad to claim both to the German and Chilean states the right to truth, justice, and memory. In 2015, a movie directed by the German director Florian Gallenberg and starring Emma Stone was released in Netflix, and the movie tells the story of Colonia Dignidad and its role during the dictatorship. So the association had been since 2014 pressuring, with not much success, the German and the Chilean states to intervene in the case of Colonia Dignidad and conduct investigations about what happened in the place. So taking advantage of the visibility that the movie brought to the public eye, the association started developing strategies to protect the place as a national monument to prevent further alterations that could erase important evidences. In 2017, the former Colonia Dignidad, and now Villa Baviera, was designated as national monument as a result of the actions of the Association of Memory and Human Rights, but against the will of the residents and administrators of Villa Baviera. However, despite that the official designation recognizes the dark history of Colonia Dignidad and prevents further alterations, its narrative does not translate into the narratives of the private space of Villa Baviera. So, for example, as you cannot see very well, but the territory, the land of Villa Baviera is covered of these signs that tell the uses of the buildings or the different spaces, especially focus on what the production was there during the time of the Colonia Dignidad, but completely omits any history about like the repression of the dictatorship or even the forced labor that they were forced to produce the economy of Colonia Dignidad at the time. So basically all the dark history is completely erased from the place. So as a response to this contradiction and this erasure, the association complemented their formal actions with the creation of an online 3D memory site to make visible the struggles and the story that they want to tell about the place. So you can visit the memory site in the website of the association. The Association of Human Rights have used both the available heritage regulations and informal memorialization practices to intervene and reclaim the contested space of Colonia Dignidad. Their actions have made public the historic contestations between these two groups of victims, the political victims of the dictatorship that were tortured, executed and disappeared from Colonia, and the colonos who were abused by Paul Schaeffer. But they have also made visible the state's inability to take responsibility and mediate in the conflicts resulted from the state complicity and responsibility in diverse forms of repression and violence. So for example, just last week, the association partnered with a German mainstream TV channel to denounce that the current Ministry of Justice and Human Rights was a strong supporter of Colonia, everyone knows that, and that according to human rights activists has obstructed the investigations in the place. Today the Chilean parliament, just today, called the minister to evaluate the continuation of his place in government. So just as LOTA and Valparaíso, Colonia Dignidad suggests that in the case, heritage takes an important political and social role that goes beyond dominant frames. So to wrap up these insurgent heritage cases, as I said, each of them illustrate different types, forms and politics of heritage contestation in Chile, as well as diverse phases of citizenship that emerge through their particular characteristics. LOTA illustrates how citizens with the loss of the mind and their jobs have redirected their social struggles through heritage to negotiate a new identity and recognition in the country based on their labor heritage. Valparaíso exposes the fragmented nature of both heritage and urban planning and illustrates how official heritage is turned upside down by citizens with no formal spaces of participation in decision-making are in place. Their actions have become a precedent for a wider political debate in the country and to the right to the city. Colonia highlights the incapability of the state and the Chilean society to acknowledge and to be accountable of our own history of violence. They illustrate the contestation between citizens that refuse to remain in the places socially and culturally assigned to them and demand their right to memory. They all show how citizens are using heritage as a political tool to participate of the public life and decision-making, change relationships at all different levels of societies, and decolonize how their spaces and representations are shaped. So to conclude the presentation of my research, I want to connect these insurgent heritage examples with what is going on today in the streets of Chile. So this is an image of the Great March in October that gathered more than 1 million people protesting in the streets of Santiago and many other cities across Chile against extreme neoliberal policies, political elitism, and colonial legacy that has positioned Chile as one of the most unequal countries in the world. The heritage grassroots organizations that I've shown you help us read and historicize this moment of change that Chile is experiencing since October 18. As part of this process, we have witnessed how, just as LOTA, Valparaíso, and Colonia Dignidad, people across the country have begun questioning and redefining the heritage narratives and practices that occupy the public space since colonial times. For example, these pictures show how people in the northern city of La Serena has overthrown the monument of a Spanish colonizer and replaced it by an indigenous woman representation. And this is happening like all across Chile. Or the example of the La Decolonizadora, which is a feminist grassroots journal that I don't know if you can see very well, but that basically this journal traces the decolonizing actions of the public spaces in the context of the ongoing mobilizations. The pages of the La Decolonizadora can be found scattered in the streets of Santiago and in the main streets of the cities of Chile. At the same time, multiple grassroots organizations, including the MESA de Patrimonio de LOTA, together with heritage professionals and public officers, have organized in a country-wide movement to collectively demand a new and more inclusive heritage law. And we see in these two pictures members of this heritage movement in the former Italy Square. The Italy Square is a landmark in the city center of Santiago where traditionally, historically, all public manifestations take place, so positive, negative, all of them, soccer, whatever it is. And here, today obviously is the epicenter of the current social mobilizations. And here they are renaming the square as Dignity Square as a reference to the social movement's demand. So to conclude, the examples that I've shown you make clear that heritage is a political act that often perpetuates dominant power relations and excludes individuals and communities based on class, gender, ethnicity, minority status, and expert knowledge, as critical heritage studies has informed us. However, I think that the notion of insurgent heritage that I explained today suggests that a different future for heritage is possible. The insurgent heritage prompts us, scholars and policymakers, to consider the lived experiences of people, including their creative practices and narratives, the affects connected to heritage landscapes and its communities, and the way they talk and care for places to create more appropriate heritage frames than those that continue to legitimate multiple forms of exclusions and oblivion in how we produce the built environment. Thank you very much for